Judge Malcolm Brewer was a figure synonymous with unshakable authority, his reputation built on decades of hard, unrelenting decisions. At 62, with 35 years on the bench, his judgments were swift, resolute, and seemingly beyond reproach. But even he wasn't prepared for the storm brewing beneath one particular case that would ultimately redefine his career and his conscience. The courtroom in Fresno, California was packed that sweltering summer day. Judge Brewer sat at the helm, his stern gaze fixed on Ryan Hale, a 24-year-old defendant charged with an armed robbery that had left a jewelry store in chaos and a man critically injured. Ryan, a young mechanic with no criminal record, stood stoically as the evidence mounted against him, fingerprints on a weapon, eyewitness testimonies, and surveillance footage that seemed to place him at the scene. Despite his unwavering claim of innocence, the jury found him guilty after only 3 hours of deliberation. "You stand convicted of crimes that have devastated this community," Judge Brewer announced, his voice as firm as ever. He sentenced Ryan to 60 years in prison, the gavel's echo cementing the young man's fate. Ryan's mother wept quietly in the back of the room as her son was led away in shackles, his dreams extinguished. For Brewer, it was another day in the pursuit of justice, or so he believed. But as the case faded from headlines, something gnawed at him, an unease he dismissed as fatigue. Weeks later, while reviewing an unrelated police misconduct case, Brewer stumbled upon a forgotten piece of evidence. It was an inventory log from an old police investigation involving a weapon that matched the one used in the robbery Ryan was convicted for. However, this weapon had been seized during an arrest 2 days after the crime, making it impossible for it to have been used during the robbery. The implications were staggering. Brewer's investigation deepened, revealing a labyrinth of inconsistencies. The arresting officer from the unrelated case, Detective Lewis, had also testified in Ryan's trial. Brewer discovered that the anonymous tip linking Ryan to the robbery came from a burner phone registered to the same detective. The evidence began to paint a picture of deliberate manipulation, a web of corruption designed to frame Ryan Hale. Haunted by the possibility of a miscarriage of justice, Brewer sought the help of a retired investigator, Daniel Hayes. Together, they pored over police records, witness statements, and internal memos. The deeper they dug, the darker the revelations became. Reports had been falsified, evidence had gone missing, and a key witness had been coerced into altering his testimony to incriminate Ryan. "This isn't just negligence," Hayes told Brewer grimly. "This was intentional." The breakthrough came when the coerced witness admitted to being pressured by Detective Lewis to change his statement. "He threatened me," the man confessed, "said I'd be charged with obstruction if I didn't cooperate." Piece by piece, Brewer and Hayes unraveled a conspiracy designed to protect the real culprit while pinning the crime on Ryan. The realization shook Brewer to his core. A young man had been condemned by a system he had devoted his life to upholding, a system he now saw as fallible, even corrupt. Brewer knew what had to be done. The truth demanded justice, no matter the cost. As he prepared to bring the evidence to light, he braced himself for the consequences. Exposing the corruption would not only challenge the integrity of the justice system, but also force Brewer to confront his own role in its failings. What had begun as a routine case had evolved into a fight for redemption, not just for Ryan Hale, but for a system that had lost its way. Detective Lewis had a long history of underhanded tactics, intimidating witnesses, falsifying evidence, and coercing confessions. Despite these actions, his career remained untouched, shielded by bureaucratic barriers. The breakthrough came when Hayes managed to retrieve deleted emails from Lewis's police account. One particular email stood out. It was addressed to the district attorney, detailing a scheme to ensure a conviction in the Carter's jewelers case. Attached was a list of fabricated evidence and manipulated witness statements. Brewer felt his anger surge as he read the email. The very system he dedicated his life to was rotten. But there was no time for despair. He had the evidence to take action, though exposing the truth would be dangerous. Lewis had influential allies within the department, and Brewer knew that going public could cost him everything: his career, his reputation, even his safety. But when he thought of Ryan Hale still imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, the decision was clear. They had to go public. The next day, Brewer filed a motion to reopen Ryan's case, attaching the damning evidence against Lewis. The motion sent shockwaves through the courthouse, but Brewer didn't stop there. He also filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice, calling for an independent investigation into Lewis and the Fresno Police Department. The backlash was swift. Brewer received anonymous threats, and his colleagues distanced themselves. The media began to question his motives, but Brewer stood his ground. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. As the storm around him intensified, Brewer realized that this battle was far from over. The hardest challenges were yet to come. The fallout from his motion was explosive. Local headlines blared accusations of corruption within the Fresno Police Department, and public outrage spread quickly. Brewer found himself in the midst of a fierce debate. Some hailed him as a hero for seeking justice, while others branded him a traitor to the system he had always upheld. The threats escalated. Brewer received silent phone calls, and one morning he found his car tires slashed, with a threatening note on the windshield. Despite these dangers, he refused to be intimidated. He had witnessed firsthand how systemic failures had ruined lives, and he wouldn't back down now. Meanwhile, Detective Lewis wasn't going down without a fight. Through his attorney, he denied the allegations, calling Brewer's motion a personal vendetta. But Brewer had something Lewis didn't: proof. As the investigation unfolded, Hayes discovered a crucial piece of evidence: security camera footage from a parking lot near the jewelry store on the day of the robbery. The footage, which had somehow never been submitted during the trial, showed a man resembling Lewis carrying a duffel bag and leaving the scene. Brewer's heart raced as he watched the video. It was not just exculpatory, it was damning. The next step was clear but dangerous. Brewer called for an emergency hearing to present this new evidence. The courtroom was tense as the footage played before a packed audience. Gasps rippled through the crowd as it became clear that the man in the footage was none other than Detective Lewis, who had led the investigation into Ryan Hale. Brewer accused him of fabricating evidence, manipulating witnesses, and framing an innocent man to cover his own tracks. The reaction was immediate. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, and flashes of cameras lit up the courtroom. Lewis, sitting in the gallery with his lawyer, appeared pale but defiant. "You're making a mistake," he hissed as he was led away in handcuffs. "You don't know what you've started." The case was now in the hands of a higher court, and Ryan Hale's conviction was under review. But Brewer knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much larger battle. As the courtroom emptied, Brewer felt the weight of his discovery. The truth had come to light. But the fight for justice was far from over. Weeks later, Brewer found himself back in the same courtroom where Ryan Hale had been sentenced. This time, the atmosphere was different. The gallery was packed with reporters, activists, and Ryan's family, all awaiting the judge's decision on the retrial. Ryan, visibly thinner and worn from his time in prison, sat at the defense table. Despite the ordeal, his posture remained steady and his gaze unwavering. Brewer couldn't help but feel a lump form in his throat. This young man had endured so much for a crime he hadn't committed. The evidence was irrefutable: the falsified reports, the coerced testimonies, the surveillance footage. It all pointed to a web of corruption that had framed Ryan and protected the real criminals. When the presiding judge announced the decision to overturn Ryan's conviction, the room erupted in applause and tears. Ryan stood, trembling as his mother rushed to embrace him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Brewer, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, allowed himself a rare smile. Justice had finally been served, but the journey had come at a cost. In the days that followed, the fallout spread far and wide. Detective Lewis faced criminal charges, and an independent investigation into the Fresno Police Department revealed a culture of corruption that had been allowed to thrive for years. The case sparked national calls for reform, with Brewer's role becoming a symbol of accountability within the justice system. Despite the accolades, Brewer remained introspective. He knew that this victory was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The system he had once trusted was flawed, but it wasn't beyond repair. He was determined to spend the rest of his career fighting to improve it. As for Ryan, his journey was just beginning. Freed from the burden of a wrongful conviction, he vowed to dedicate his life to helping others who had been unjustly imprisoned. His story became a beacon of hope for those who believed in resilience and the pursuit of truth. The story of Ryan Hale and Judge Brewer serves as a powerful reminder that justice isn't infallible. It requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. If this story inspired you, consider supporting organizations that work to free the wrongfully convicted and advocate for systemic reform. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the way we see the world. Because sometimes, the fight for justice doesn't end in the courtroom. It begins there.